Welcome, everyone. Really excited to have you all with us today. Let me share my screen. We're really excited to have you with another series of UX Nights. We also have a Spotify playlist where everyone just adds random songs here and there. We love to just pull songs for our events from here. So if you want to throw some jams in, go right on ahead. And so for today's schedule, we have a little bit of information, some hacks, pro tips, especially for folks who just graduated school or graduated boot camp on how you can be successful in the job market and UX. And then afterwards, we have a little bit of a Q&A group discussion, hangout time regarding the topic. And so for anyone who is new to our events, welcome. Our organization is called QTBIPOC Design, which stands for Queer, Trans, Black, Indigenous, People of Color Design. We provide design education free and accessible for our BIPOC LGBTQ plus community. And we have so many awesome events, and we'll share with you at the very end all the different things that we're running this month that's upcoming. But we do monthly courses like this. We do game nights. We do events where we bring in amazing guest speakers. And we also just recently launched our first cohort for our UX Bootcamp course. And so many things happening. We're really excited to have you along with us on our journey as we do more and more with the community. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some tips and advice for folks who maybe they're in the middle of being in a boot camp or in school still, or maybe you're just finishing up school or finishing up boot camp, and then maybe you're just applying to jobs. And so we'll go through each section and kind of talk a little bit about some of our learnings, lessons, and advice from each section. Here we go. Okay, so especially for folks who are in school right now, or you're doing a bootcamp course, you have an amazing opportunity to work on a bunch of projects, right? Where you get to put it into your portfolio, work on, things with other people, or you're working on things by yourself that you're really passionate about. And the biggest advice that we have for this part is just as you're working through things, keep throwing it into your portfolio. Too often, a lot of students work on stuff and it's like, amazing, beautiful. You have like, click-through prototype, like 200 screens, but what's in the portfolio is like 4 screens and like 2-sentence description. And so the biggest advice here is just keep throwing it into your portfolio as soon as you can, and however you get it to your portfolio, then start culling it down, right, once it's in there. And so as you work through case studies and projects, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the future of today's presentation, is just think about the case studies that would be relevant to your next role. So as we think about what do we want to do, right? Think about what positions you want to get, where you want to work. Also think about what type of projects you're going to be working on there. And a lot of students forget about kind of just drawing correlation or connecting the dots. But if you were to, okay, let's all put on the hat of the employer where we're thinking about who do I want to hire in these positions, a junior designer, associate designer, right? You probably have a project that you're staffing for that you're going, okay, I need a designer on this project. And then you go into the market to figure out who's going to fit that project. If you see somebody who's worked on a very similar project, right, who did similar things, that's going to be, of course, who you resonate with. And you're going to be like, okay, I want to interview you first. I'm going to check you out and do that. And sometimes if you see projects that don't have a correlation to it, you might try to figure out if it will fit or if it doesn't fit. And so kind of the tip with this is we often have really amazing ideas, right, of our capstone projects or individual projects that might be self-initiated projects, which is just our own concept that's brought to life. And my advice is if you want to do it, you have to invest a lot of time to make sure it's solid, right? And end-to-end experience is really great. And oftentimes for the people who are recruiting, it's really hard to use that to see, okay, how am I going to apply that lesson and learning onto this project? Because you're rarely going to be brought on, right, to concept the product from scratch, from start to finish. And so think about maybe even the parts of your project, if it's your own individual project, of how would you fit it within a bigger, larger business context, right? And also if you have case studies that are more relevant to just getting an existing product and iterating on it, although it might not be as cool, it actually is more relevant for the job, industry, and search. Oh, also one more tip is if you don't want to be a developer in the future, don't worry about developing your own website from scratch. Because let's say you have a recruiter looking for a UX designer, right? And your website, oh my God, the development is insane. It's beautiful. They're gonna go, yeah, go get a development job. It seems that you're much better at it. So you want to make sure you're just really crisp and clear with what your offering is to the market. So as we get into some more tips of folks who are in school, one of the biggest advice that I always give to people is focus on just making friends. Don't focus on just like making connections for the sake of connections. Ultimately, you want to think about your network of all these folks who are around you that you want to work with, that you want to collaborate with, that you have a really high regard for their thoughts and feedback. And a lot of the times when we just throw this big, massive net, right, and we're just pulling everyone in, we oftentimes pull all these other folks in just for the sake of pulling folks in. And as we grow into the designer that we're going to be in the future, we just want to make sure we go into the spaces that we really want to go into and groom ourselves and develop and spread our wings. But also for the folks who get really stressed out because you're like, I don't want to go into like another networking event because everyone's kind of like, it's like, go into it and whatever. If they're not like your friends, like, okay, like not too cool for me, or, it's like, but if you don't resonate with them, it's totally okay, But if it helps to just put on that lens of, I just want to make some friends, see who I get along with, it helps to really reduce a lot of that anxiety. At least for me, it does. Another advice is, at the end of the day, also, especially for folks who are in school, just have fun, just have fun with your projects. Enjoy your time being a student, enjoy your time learning. The tip I give is the real world is not going anywhere. And I see a lot of students sometimes try to apply so many real world constraints on their project. And it's like, yeah, you'll get there. Give it a few years, give it 1 year, you'll get there in a minute. And with that, think about the projects you take, the things that you want to do. And as we talked about, maybe it's this pie in the sky project that you want to take on. Instead of maybe take on the whole concept, right? Maybe take on a little piece of it. And then maybe that's the project that you work on, that you put into your portfolio, right? And especially for folks who are just like exploring art or music or anything that's more exploratory. I did an undergrad major in dance and I was like, oh, this has to be like industry ready. It's like has to be perfect. And then afterwards, I was like, ugh, like I should just gone like crazy, like made it so weird, like just like have fun with it, because and you get what? You get praise, you get graded for it. Like, yeah, I would do my undergrad so differently. But if anyone is in school still or taking classes, the freedom you have and the flexibility you're not going to get really later on in your life either. So have fun, relish it, enjoy. Yeah. Let's see. So folks who just graduated, right? Let's get into the post boot camp or post undergraduate, this part. So a bunch of advice for you. So the first one is as a part of any cohort graduating a major institution or program, there typically is an alumni network that exists that you can leverage to gain insights into the industry, have doors open for you, or at least at the bare minimum, be connected with folks who you share with them education or other facets of the education that you have. And so really with this, take advantage of it, see who would like to give you a mentoring session, see if anyone wants to chat with you about just career in general. And again, remember, apply the lens of just coming in, looking for friends, and don't worry too much about, oh yeah, it has to be like X, Y, and Z. Sometimes the folks you find, right, who might be really, really beneficial for you might be the person that you least expect. And too often we try to credentialize everyone to where it's like, if you worked at, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, like I put you at the, top of the food chain, right? And we often have this bias that by working at a company, all of a sudden, your ideas matter way more than everyone else. And as we talk about, right, dismantling inherited biases and ways of systemic oppression that exists in our industry, it is to also remove the concept of putting so much weight and emphasis onto credentials. And this act of credentializing is sometimes an unfortunate way that we set up walls and gates around certain spaces that folks enter too. Because as we think about it, right, there's so many biases that have gone into creating many, many large systems of oppression and just inequality in general. And so a lot of the times the folks who are extremely successful now, if you look at the tenure and all the things that they have been successful with, unfortunately, biases, they may have benefited from it as well. And so we just have to be really conscious of it. And I will give you this nugget too. If you message someone who you would least expect, other folks would probably not be contacting them as much too. And so you might get more time of their day to get advice and such as well. The next one is career coaching. So along the lines of setting up time with alumni program of your school, ask if there is any post-grad programming. And this is a huge advice I always give to folks looking for boot camp or any post-secondary education, is also ask what services of these do they offer. This is a huge, huge, huge part, especially of these boot camp courses where you're spending like tens of thousands of dollars for, and ask them, right? What services do they offer? What platforms they offer? What career coach do they offer to allow people to bridge their experience from school into professional world? Can they connect you directly with the professional themselves, right? And if all else fails and you're like, this is not the cup of tea for me, my advice also is, you've worked with people, you've designed with people, you've created with people, make your own post-secondary education program, alumni group. What does that look like, right? There's so many other opportunities and organizations that exist. We'll share a couple here, but if you've heard of like Design Buddies, ADP List, like so many different organizations that exist that just bring people together. And you can usually use those as vehicles to help create the group that you seek to continue learning and co-creating with. And so if we're to break down, right, like, okay, here you gave me some tips. You're like, but like I just need like the more tactical advice of just like how do I become successful, right? To get my next job. And as we think about what are the individual pieces that you just need to like, bring together and wrap a bow and be like, ta-da. It's a combination of hard skills, soft skills, and just materials that you just have, right? Deliverables, artifacts. And so as we work from like left to right, hard skills, what are they? These are just the experiences, expertise, execute on deliverables, right? And so design tools. So what tools do you use? Do you use Adobe Suite? Do you use Figma? Do you use Sketch, right? What is it? And put that, of course, also in your resume and your portfolio and all these places. You want to make sure people understand this, right? So how about this? All of these things, you want to make sure whatever you're presenting in your resume, portfolio, or whatever gets to the interviewer, right, or the recruiter, they have to be able to see all these things. If they don't, you're missing a couple things. Throw it in there, you're good. The next thing is just capacity to design, right? Or capacity to create wireframes, capacity to iterate. And what does that look like, right? And then the other hard skill is different methodologies that you have to help inform your ability to create wireframes and to create designs. This could be research, it could be creating personas, creating journeys, strategies, different ways of executing it, but really it's what are your tools that you're using? What is your output? And how are you getting to the output, right? If we're distill it into really simple infrastructure. As we talk about soft skills, right? This is about how you present yourself, especially with folks that you are going to be interviewing with. And then the first one is just interviewing presentation skills, right? So thinking about ways that, you know, even before you get to the interview, how you lay out your portfolio, that is a presentation skill in itself. And we'll give you some tips and feedback in this presentation, but it's really around just how you packaging up this story, this narrative in a really simple way to understand, right? 10, 15 minutes of this is what the problem was, this is what I did, this is my result, right? And then when it comes to interview, building up the skill to be able to talk through what you've done and answer questions when somebody asks you a little bit more about your projects and processes. The next one is collaboration skills. So rarely are people hired into jobs where they only work by themselves, right? And so a big proponent is how do I show how I collaborate with other folks on the project, right? Too often we create case studies as well, where it's like me, you know, Mariah Carey. How do we work and collaborate with other folks? Oh, you don't want to hear me say. Everyone's gonna like leave the Zoom. That was so funny. But how do I show that I worked with other people, right? And so in the beginning, maybe sometimes it helps set up the case study. People say, hey, I worked with X, Y, and Z person. This was my role, right? But another opportunity is as you're creating the wireframes or designs, just showing in the writing even, just how you collaborating with other people in your domain, right? Design, plus also other people from other domains, development, strategy, analytics, you name it, right? And the more you can show this, it makes other folks who are hiring you feel much better that you can fit into their team dynamic, right? And then another soft skill that's really important is industry awareness. So this is just generally how aware are you with what's happening in the space of things that you're creating in, right? And so especially when we have these projects, right, where we're like, okay, I want to create this like brand new project that touches on like, for example, what's a good industry? Like the finance space, right? I want to innovate a new way that we could do taxes, right? I hate taxes. It can always become better. And the question that's going to come up, right, especially as we gauge seniority of talent is, okay, so what's happening in the industry, right? And too often we go, oh, I just looked at TurboTax, right? I just want to make it better. But another part of it is understanding, okay, who's, you know, a mover and shaker in the industry? What's already being done, right? And a big proponent of equitable design, where we continuously build upon what exists currently, is to use and infuse the learnings of all these other different domains, projects, platforms, people, so that we create solutions that build on top versus dismantling and starting over from scratch. And too often we imagine this concept of design innovation as this practice of having to tear something apart just so we can build it up. In that sense, it's really an ego-driven processes rather than a human-centric processes. And so really this one is, how are you aware of what is happening around you? What research do you do? Where are you plugged in to receive inputs of what's happening around you? Yeah. And then the last part, obviously materials. This is a part that we hate, your resume and your portfolio. We'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but you got to have it. A part of that too is cover letter. My tip with cover letter is break it apart into different pieces. And as you apply to other companies, have the different pieces in like a Google Sheets where you have like the introduction, body, ending, and you literally pick and pull from the Google Sheets, and then you create this like cover letter out of scratch. Not really out of scratch, but you're building from the pieces. And so the part of it is just make it easier on yourself, but don't allow just like a cover letter be in the way of you applying to a job. Shouldn't be that hard. Make it easy. Yep. And as you finish school too, and as you go into the world of design and UX, there's just so many terms, right? Of ways that they describe titles, roles, responsibilities. And so just going from top down, we might have heard of UX, right? This user experience. This is really new in the industry within the past, really about like 10 years, 10, 12 years. Before that, like, you had designers developers doing this job. UI came out of the movement of UX to specialize more in the interface portion of it, developing icons, developing logos. Designers, these are really much broader term describing folks who design, but because UX started, design and designers became more specialized into digital design. So they'll do more of the aesthetics, right? The visual design of the product. A product designer, right? So this one came recently in the past few years, really budding out of this movement of product management, right? Which is the concept of understanding the end-to-end development process of a product, a digital product, which includes ideation, iteration, and business logistics, right? And so often product designers will not just have to be able to do UX and some design, but also understand the business component of it. And so they really didn't have a title to figure out, like, do you just put UX plus like strategist? But really this product design is this role that encapsulates all of it. UX developer, sometimes you see this in some instances where they have a developer who's more focused on design or user experience. So they'll work on prototypes, they'll work on really quickly iterating concepts, right? So by the time it gets to development, it wasn't, just this beautifully designed thing that just falls apart when you try to build it. And so all these roles, right, they're really coming out of different needs within the whole end-to-end product life cycle, right? And different roles help to complement different people's skill sets. So I would say, hold these loosely. They also change depending on each company, right? And whoever's in these different roles also have different expertise. And so why the roles are also different per company is because whoever's in the roles adjacent or complementary to the role that you're going into have different skill sets. And when people have different skill sets, they're able to take different, workload off of certain roles, or they cannot. And so you get these like hodgepodge roles that you're like, like, what do they really mean? And then the last one, UX researcher. So these are roles dedicated more so for research generation, creating insights, helping to create artifacts, right? Personas, journeys, all these different things that help to ground research with different strategic methods. My advice, the titles mean one thing. What would be really helpful when you apply for a job is actually asking, what are my typical deliverables? Yeah. What are my projects that I'm typically working on? And what am I expected to do as a part of this project in this role. And that should give you a better sense of what you're actually going to do in the day-to-day rather than relying on some of these titles. Yeah. Cool. And then, so just a quick, additional plus one from the last slide is just talking a little bit about this subdivisions within the UX, user experience realm. And along the lines of user experience that we had talked about, which is often the concept of wireframing and iterating on blueprints, right? We also have information architecture, which is more of the technical kind of, how do I describe it? It's more of just setting up the technical infrastructure of a website. So if you think about sitemap, for example, organizing of data, here we go. It's the organizing of complex data of a website or of a product. User interface, again, we just talked about this UI design, which is more iconography. You can also see this deviate into people who maintain a design system, right? So there's like a big brand, there's a bunch of rules. Sometimes their role is also to maintain, this brand Bible that they call, and to make sure all the things that touch it are consistent. You also have UX strategy. And so design thinking is one thing that came out of this. You often see user experience designers who do workshops and who work in more of a consulting lens, take on this role where they enter and help to use their creative capacity to help people ideate. And then we also talked about UX research, generating insights, also helping to create testing methodologies. They could create the A/B tests. They can create all the different means of making sure that the end design is validated, right? They could even conduct the interviews with different users, consumers, such. And then UX engineering, we just talked about this, development, very similar, creating prototypes, iterating on that very quickly as well. Let's see. So as we get to hunting for jobs, let's see. A few things, right? We're in the market now. We finished school. We're like, oh my God, WTF do I do? I am so stressed. I've been there. I will give you the advice. Your first job is the hardest to land, but once you get it, it is so much easier afterwards. It's like just making sure to get that one job just for your foot in the door will help you gain some more experience that you put on your portfolio, right? Because in the past, you were doing like all these things, like creating all this stuff, putting a portfolio that was coming out of your own resource, out of your own pocket, right? Like you're paying for school, doing all this stuff. But once you get your first job, you're paid to create more case studies to put in your portfolio. It becomes so much smoother, I promise. And so really a lot of this advice now is, how do I just get that first job, right? And so the first advice is see if there's opportunities, right? More than alumni or this stuff, but just if you can just grab coffee with people in the industry, right? There are many amazing platforms that have come up since COVID had started, especially with people spending too much time on the internet, opportunities to just connect with one another in a very casual setting. And so a great resource is checking out ADP List, where you're able to connect with other folks across different industries to be able to get advice. And you can actually connect with people all around the world. My advice here is don't focus on the title. Don't focus on where they're from, because more often than not, you're going to try to reach out to someone who comes from like a big, tech company, and their line, right, is like extremely long, or they have no time and they'll only give you like 15 minutes of the day, And so think about, right, type of friends you want to make. If you also want to reach out to them, you can as well. But my advice usually helps to point people to folks who might be able to put more energy to help you succeed. Yeah. There are also a lot of organizations that's come up, especially during COVID, to help students, graduates, just folks in the industry. There's so many ways of connecting with folks who are like you. So here at QTBIPOC Design, we are a collective of BIPOC LGBTQ plus folks, which is awesome, right? So you're able to connect with folks who are in our family, and there are also a lot of adjacent organizations that we highly recommend and we partner with as well. Out in Tech, another amazing organization to check out. Design Buddies, Students of UX, Queer Design Clubs, Black Suit Design, so many. They have also Slack groups that you can join, be a part of. Some are a little overwhelming, not gonna lie. With like 1,000+ people and like chats every day, like it can get a lot. So I would say try it out, try out different spaces and see which one resonates. And if it doesn't, iterate that, right? See what else you can join. And what else? Ah, and there's a bunch of newsletters too that go out. I forgot to mention one of them, but there's one called Case Study Club, which is really awesome to check out. That one sends you in an email case studies every single week. That is really cool. A way to think about ways you can integrate different ideas and thoughts into your portfolio. Another one is called Diversified Tech, which actually sends you a bunch of job listings in technology, especially for marginalized communities, which is really great. Case Study Club. That's the one that sends you an email each week with portfolio tips and advice. Yeah, of course. More advice for you. And also, right, there's so many more job directories than just LinkedIn. There are job directories at Dribbble, Behance, Twitter, AngelList, Product Hunt, Working Not Working. Twitter is not like a typical job listing board. People actually just search like, hey, looking for X, looking for a designer, looking for UX designer. Just search terms in Twitter and you'll be really surprised at what you find. I've had a couple leads come through Twitter and it's just been really surprising how it's been really, really beneficial just to cut through the noise, especially of these listing services. Also, they're really expensive, right? For smaller companies where you can join. And I would say another opportunity is Craigslist. When I was first starting and I was freelancing, I used Craigslist to find a lot of opportunities, a lot of freelance opportunities with different companies. Yeah. But all these different services have places where you can go and see all the full list of different jobs and applications. And as you're applying to jobs, I also highly recommend keeping a track, whether it's through Google Sheets or just some format where you can consolidate data. Because what's going to happen is as you start using these different resources, you might accidentally double dip in a couple instances. And you just want to make sure, right, if the leads come through, and it's okay to double dip too, particularly because sometimes a channel might get overloaded with one request. And then if you like, let's say I'm applying to Pfizer, right? It's like, what word do I have in my mind? Pfizer company. And I'm like, I want to be a designer, right? And I apply on LinkedIn. They might have a lot of leads on LinkedIn, but if you apply to them and if they have a listing on Product Hunt, for example, might have less and you might have more visibility. So it doesn't hurt to double dip, but if you're communicating with somebody in different channels, just make sure you take some notes so you don't get caught in a situation where they ask you, oh yeah, do you remember talking to blah, blah, blah? And you're like, who? That doesn't look good. And if you haven't made an account yet on Working Not Working, I actually highly recommend it for every single designer. For our bootcamp, we're actually making it a part of our core curriculum. But Working Not Working is a really great place to start your portfolio. Just throwing images up there. You don't have to worry about the layout. Too often as a designer, we're like, it's not the perfect layout. And the recruiter just like doesn't care. And so Working Not Working is just really amazing space, beautifully designed. And their job listings are actually really, really great. And a lot of the folks really communicate to the people who reach out. So highly encourage everyone check that out. Since COVID has started, this hasn't really been a thing, but they've been moving it digitally. But this concept of job fairs, where a lot of designers come together and companies come attend to look at all prospective talent. My advice is reach out to recruiters, reach out to organizations, schools, see what exists, and see if you could just take a part of it. You know, sometimes they allow other folks to come in, and it's just a general recruiting fair as well. And then lastly, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So take it easy. Don't apply to like too many jobs all at once, or else you're going to burn out. That's not what we want, right? Find a balance that works for you. Let's see what else. Oh my God, there's so many more slides. Okay, I'm going to go through these tips really quickly. So, working with recruiters, biggest advice, especially on LinkedIn, start looking for recruiters. You just search for, whatever role you want to work on plus recruiter, just start messaging them. They get paid when you find a job, they want to work with you. So just look for them, make them your friends. They just want to get you a job, And a couple notes as you work with recruiters too, they might not always be the best fit because there's so many of them out there. Again, it's like a personality fit, right? If you just really jive and you get them, that's going to be a really great relationship, right? Because they're going to keep finding projects that suit you and they're going to keep throwing it at you, right? Sometimes, unfortunately, recruiters might actually have multiple candidates that they put in front of an agency or agent or a company. And in that instance, right, it's just the recruiter trying to make sure somebody gets hired. And so you're not always aware of it, but if a recruiter keeps doing that to you, you're just like, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind, right? And as they are negotiating pay for you, sometimes they don't always negotiate higher than you would want, particularly because they just want to get you hired, right? And so in that instance, just be cognizant. If you're like on the higher end of the pay spectrum, they're not going to advocate as harder for you. But on the plus side, if you're on the lower end of the spectrum, they're going to advocate for you because pushing you to normal will be easier for them. Plus, they usually get paid more. Recruiters work in many different ways. If you work in a in an hourly contract role, they usually take a cut of it where it's about 10 to 20% on top of your hourly rate that they make. If you are working with a recruiter on a salary position, they usually get a flat rate, just a check cut out to them, which is sometimes anywhere from 5 to 20% of your salary, depending on how much you make. And they also have a clause with the company who hired you. If you don't stay for a year, right, they actually owe less in fees. So if you quit after a month, they'll maybe pay a prorated rate. And so as you work with recruiters, the way to get the best result is really establish a great connection with them, be friends with them, stay on top of mind, connect with them on a regular basis, and just ping them and catch up. That's worked really well with me. Actually, when I was in San Diego, I used to own a cupcake shop in San Diego, like out of my house. And then I learned, I was like, oh my God, I need to get like industrial grade kitchen. And then I closed it. But I would bake cupcakes for recruiters. I was like, test out these cupcakes. Love me, get me jobs. And it worked really well. But just in regards of, I was just making friends with them and I would just come by on the holidays and I would just talk to them and say, hey, what's up? And just by making genuine connections, and I'm still friends with some of them to this day, of a lot of the recruiters from San Diego. They're just really great people. And if you find the ones that work well with you, don't forget to touch base with them, and just catch up. They're human too. Some tips on resume. Let me just like bump these out first. So 3 advice on as you're writing resumes, right? First and foremost, keywords. This is the most important thing. And as remember earlier, we were talking about this chart of all these things that you just had to have. Those have to be related to keywords. And you want to make sure that they're in everywhere, in your portfolio and in your resume. Yeah. Depending also, like if you're going up in seniority, the keywords are going to definitely shift over time, right? Like if, you know, you have a VP, whoever applying to a job and wrote like Microsoft Word and like their resume, you're like, interesting, right? And so as you're working through it, it's putting the deliverables of what you're going to be executing on, right, as a part of your task, your methodologies that you're going to use, right? And any other keywords related to your actual role. And that's going to help at least through like the different parsing systems that exist, or as recruiters just want to see if you're going to be a good fit. There are also editing apps out there that will help you do this. Grammarly is a great tool for just grammar checking, different spelling, grammar of all the things you're doing. But another great AI tool is called Resume Worded. And so you can actually upload job description and your resume, and it'll give you a comparison of the match. If it's good or bad, they give you a scoring. They have a free plan that you can use, and it's really fascinating. Don't take everything, I mean, take things with a grain of salt, but some of the advice is really helpful, at least that you can see really quickly. And then last but not least, see if you can get editors, just like how we're writing a paper, right? Resume is no different. The more people you can get advice from, the more collective effort it will be involved to create it. But tip with this is if somebody gives you a feedback, again, take it with a grain of salt. Everyone has different contexts. And so the idea is maybe ask a couple people, see what is a common feedback, right, from person to person, and then apply that to your resume versus apply every single da, 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 da. Because if you keep doing that, it might just end up looping in a circle. We're getting towards the end of this, and some advice for as you're creating portfolio, right? So you're creating these case studies, they're going into your website, your working out working page. Sometimes designers are really stressed out by what it has to entail. And my mantra in life is just simplify, make it easier on yourself, right? It's your life. You're going to live it. Make it easy for yourself, right? Have fun. And the analogy I like to give people is think of your case study as a movie plot, right? Or a movie script. As we're talking about a movie with someone, right? Like, hey, I'm going to tell you that, what happened in Frozen 2, Interesting movie. This is what happened in the beginning. This is what happened in the end. I mean, this is what happened in the middle, and this will happen in the end, right? Our case study is the same exact thing. We have the beginning, right? Where we talk about what problems were we trying to address, right? Who's the client? What are we going to do? What is our take? Who's on the team, right? And then we get into the middle, the actual work. How are we iterating? What are we doing? What are we delivering? What's our outcome of these iterations, right? And then at the end, where did we land? What did we solve? What did I learn, right? And we can even put lessons and learnings in the middle, not just the end, where we talk about what worked, what didn't work, and what we did to change it, right? And the more we can make our case studies like a story, a narrative from start to finish, that's when it's going to resonate with people, right? Because they're going to go, I get it now, right? And as we create these case studies, start with, beginning, middle, and end, and just add a couple things to the beginning, add a couple things to the middle, add a couple things to the end, right? Too often, I see a lot of portfolios do a lot in the beginning, and then you could see the designer kind of got tired. They're like, oh my God, this was a lot of work. So I'm going to put like a couple wireframes and just like put like the final screens, right? It really undersells your work, or the designer who only puts the end result, right? This is what I did. And you're like, okay, or sometimes designers just like too much in the middle, right? It's all wireframes, boom, 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 boom. Actually, that sometimes helps people more because I usually typically see less iterations of wireframes done a lot of people put a lot of effort into like upfront strategy and like personas, journeys, all this, but rarely like do they really talk through the iteration of the wireframe processes really well. And if I usually see a case study where they do even just like round one of wires, like this is what I did, round two, like, this is how I, iterated on it. To me, that makes a lot of sense. But also you want to avoid where you like have this dumping ground, right? Of this is my wireframe batch one, look at everything. Here's batch two, dump. To me, that's also not a great story, right? You're going to want to create thorough lines for each character, which could be a feature, right? So if I'm doing a overhaul of Airbnb.com, right? Instead of putting down like 700 screens in each iteration, I'll go, okay, I'm going to take the experience of booking a Airbnb experience, right? Where you connect with these hosts for, this bespoke experience. I'm going to show you how I iterated this from start to finish. And maybe the case study is a culmination of just a couple of that, right? You don't have to show all the screens. And to me, that does a lot more than you showing me 700 screens that I didn't know like what was what. Sometimes also what you want to avoid is like a click-through prototype that like you just throw it in the portfolio, you're like, okay, done. And it's like usually interviewers like it sometimes clicks the wrong thing and it's like, this is kind of crummy experience. Bye. And so what I always recommend is a storyboard format where you have screens, maybe a description below each screen, and maybe you like have like a series of screens and how it's evolved. That shows a lot of the thinking that you've done to iterate on it. And again, like thinking about keywords, don't forget to put your role, what you worked on, the software you use, and additional context just to understand what it was like to work on the project, what were you given, right? And one more hint is don't get lost in the next shiny thing as you're creating your portfolio, because oftentimes what we do as designers is we'll go, okay, let me look at the best portfolio, right? I'm going to grab that best, amazing portfolio. I'm going to put it right next to mine. I'm going to feel really bad about myself. And that's somehow going to make it look like that, right? It's like abusive. It's not healthy. It's not good. It's about just what is that one little step you can take to improve your portfolio, right? You don't know the story. You don't know how much effort and labor was involved to create these other portfolios. And honestly, the real deal is the portfolios you see on like all these like award-winning websites. You have developers partnering with designers and then they do work for each other. And so it's not always just one person doing that, right? You don't know the whole story. And so it's very hard to compare apples to oranges, especially if you're just creating your portfolio by yourself, right? So my advice is make it easy for yourself. Add restrictions. Actually, if you find yourself where you're like, oh my God, right? Like, this is so much. I'm getting caught up in like the details, right? If that's you, you have to add guardrails to yourself. And a good guardrail could be, I have to start off on working, not working to create my portfolio, right? You can't think about the layout. You can't think about like all these things. Like you have to put like slides and that's it, right? And then maybe that's the V1, right? And then you take that and then you put it into a portfolio afterwards where you have all this stuff. And that's going to be a lot better for you too, is because you're going to start understanding, right? All these screens and all these things that you want to lay out. And so again, I'm going to repeat, if you see yourself getting caught up in the details, you have to add restrictions to yourself so that you don't lose yourself in all of the nuances that maybe an interviewer doesn't care about, right? One little thing each day, right? Big advice. Oh my God, that was the end. Any questions? Was that helpful?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was super helpful. I really enjoyed it. Very, very helpful.
Awesome. Thanks. Any questions? Any questions from anyone?
I have a question actually.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm like a little embarrassed to ask this, but like I've heard a lot about people saying like, oh, you should reach out to a recruiter and that like increases your chances. But my problem is I don't know what to say. Like I don't know how to not sound like I'm just trying to get a job. I don't know how to be quote unquote personable. And I wish I could just be like, can someone just give me a script of or just like little like spark notes from like so I can not sound like a freaking robot.
Well, yeah, this is a judgment-free space, by the way. There's no such thing as a dumb question or whatever question we try to add these labels to. But I think that was a really good question. My advice is think of them as like a friend, right? And just how would you just talk to them as a friend? And to get rid of all these like, this formality sometimes. Also, like, don't be like too informal. We're like, what's up? But maybe the first message could just be, and if you want a script, it could just be, hey, looking for creative recruiters because I just recently, finished school, or give some context into why you are looking for them, right? Just one single sentence. It doesn't have to be too much in detail. And say, would love to find some time to connect and see how we can work together, right? And just saying that just allows them to now take your lead and open the door. And I generally like to just keep it really broad as like, I would love to see how we can work together, and use that right in the context of recruiter, use that in the context of the company, right? The actual business itself, use that in the context of, working on other projects. And it doesn't, provide too much context where, you know, you might be I'm like very guilty of sometimes like word vomiting. I'm like, "Ah," but yeah, keep it short, simple, and yeah. And when you say like, oh, I was looking for this person, you popped up, like people also feel really good about it. They're like, oh, me? Yeah. Aisha, does that help?
Yes, thank you. I would like to say that I'm also bad with talking to friends. I tend to second guess every single thing I'm saying, but yes, that is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And at the end of the day, right? It is what it is. When we say something, like it's up to the person, the receiving end to, you know, it's in a relationship, right? We take responsibility of 50%, but we can't take responsibility of 100%, right? They take responsibility of 50% of the relationship. So, you know, shoot the shot, see what happens. If they don't say anything, oh well, right? It's, water off a duck's back. Sometimes people are also really busy too. Yeah. Let's see. What are friends? I know. People we cohabitate with. How do you check in with recruiters without sounding like you're bugging them? What's good advice? How do I usually do it? I just say, hey, we haven't touched base for in a while. And right now, you could give them context. You're like just saying, hey, I'm thinking about going back into the market, or just saying, just on the market now. Would love to catch up sometime to touch base. That's it. Yeah. Someone's posting great content on LinkedIn or any other platform, I'll go ahead and tell them I appreciate their work. Ah, yeah. Good, Clarissa. Great advice. Yeah, a lot of people posting a lot of like LinkedIn posts nowadays because it's also like a social media platform. I actually got a lead for a project through like a comment. It was really random, but yeah, it's just commenting on each other, engaging with one another. Yeah, good tip. Any other questions? What else questions would I have if I was applying jobs? I mean, there's a couple things, right, that comes up as themes again and again as we've done these talks. One of it is this concept of portfolio fatigue, where it's I'm just keeping on doing this and it's just like kind of exhausting. You know, how do I just not get exhausted by my portfolio? Observe like what you're spending your time on, right? And what is the actual output? And so if you've seen like you spend like 10 hours and all you got done was this like one little thing, ask yourself, right? Like, is that a really great use of your time? Is it because you're getting lost in the complexity, right, of creating the portfolio and everything around it? And again, do you create guardrails around yourself so you focus on the main ideas first, and only when you have time, then you work on the details? Because sometimes fatigue shows up when we don't see result, when we don't see impact. And when we don't see things happening, there is no feedback loop happening, right? We're putting out, we're not getting back in. And so in that instance, we get fatigued because we're like, oh, like I'm doing all this and I'm not seeing anything. And so it's a matter of just being more smart and articulate with your time, maybe, to find a balance with what works for you. Should you apply for jobs that you feel like you're not qualified for? Oh my God. Yeah. Shoot your shot, go for the moon. I swear, like just just apply, you know. What's the worst that could happen, right? You gotta know. The the best thing that could happen is it opens a door, right? Yeah, you know, it might be like if it's exhausting for you to do it, don't do it. But by all means, like if you think you kind of have the qualifications for it, just try it. Like the worst that could happen is they say no. That's it, right? It's not that bad. Or if you just apply, it's automatic no, right? Nothing to lose. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's what else? And like what's another thing that shows up? Application fatigue too, where a lot of people apply for all these jobs, right? And they're like, I don't see any result. And maybe it's just being more smart with how you're applying, right? The more personal channels you can go through, it's actually more beneficial. So another tip that I forgot to put in here was as you go through jobs, right? As your network begins to grow, and let's say I'm applying to company X, a good way to kind of see how you're personally connected to that company X is go to that company X's LinkedIn page, right? And see who shows up as a first connection, who shows up as a second connection, right? And if it's a second connection, who's connected to that person? And are they friends with you? Are they close with you? And that's an interesting way to facilitate communication to get yourself into the company, to be able to find folks who you can chat with. And when you communicate with people, it doesn't have to be like specific, I want this job, so I'm contacting you. You don't have to like be like super articulate with that. Just say, hey, I'm really curious about this job. I don't know anything about this company. Would just love to learn more, you know, and make it really easy for people. And sometimes during the conversation, people will commit to helping you more than if you come in asking for more to begin with. Keep it loose, keep it open-ended, and people are more inclined to take those meetings when they're set up as such. Yeah. Keep seeing jobs that are entry level, but ask 3 years experience in coding. How do I become a better candidate when I don't have these things? Like the answer I will tell you that you wouldn't like to hear is sometimes they will put qualifications that are actually higher than what they need because they get a lot of applicants who are sometimes not reaching that level. So some recruiters, what they'll do is they'll push the qualifications actually a little bit higher just so that the people that they get in have more of those bullet points. And so my advice is to work on projects, right? There's many ways to do this. I should have put this as a slide, but take on projects that you can work on with other people, right? But don't, like, my biggest advice is really try to avoid these like blue sky projects, particularly because like truly executing on them from start to finish. You have startups, right, that struggle with like a team and millions of dollars to do it. And so, especially as a designer, my biggest advice of like how you can like, like get the biggest bang of your buck is take an experience that exists and just make it a little bit better, make it more inclusive, make it more equitable. Like it already exists, like iterate on it, right? Take an Airbnb experience, make it better, right? Through your lens. You're going to have Airbnb on it. People are familiar with it, right? That's another big part is familiarity, especially as a recruiter. They're like, this product I've never seen before. What does it do? And there's so many questions, right? But when you take these other projects and just say, hey, I'm going to plus up it, they're going to go, okay, I get this experience. Does this plus up make sense? They're like, actually, it makes sense. Check, And if you want to do case studies like that with your friends, where you take on these projects and you do these like, one-ups, that's a really great way to get portfolio pieces. There's also nonprofits out in tech. What they do is each year, they have a bunch of LGBTQ plus organizations register for the organization. And what they'll do is they'll allocate designers and design resources to help create websites for them. And so potentially you can volunteer in that capacity to work with team members and such. It gets really hairy, I would say, with the volunteer experiences, because sometimes you work with just like a lot of people who are also just like kind of spinning all the time. And so you don't have somebody in the lead capacity just help guide the conversation. So sometimes people have had a really hit or miss experience. But in that instance, my advice is just interview and ask more questions. Ask them, what have they done before, right? What's the team dynamic like? Who's leading the project? Stuff like that. So you better understand that team dynamic before you step in. And yeah, it's when you work on these individual things, that is experience. Yeah. And also the focus in the very beginning is foot in the door. How do you keep focusing on just getting that one foot in the door, right? Even if the company in the very beginning, you're like, like this is kind of like not my like passionate project. There's no rule that's in the sand that's like you must stay at this company forever, right? You could always write like this was a freelance position, right? You could always say that this company just didn't have any more budget, right? There's so many ways you can articulate why like it was such a short amount of time. You can also even say, just a team dynamic was not working out. Yeah, I would say there's so many smaller opportunities. Sometimes like it's helpful to focus less on like a salary position and just going alternative routes, right? Maybe pick up small projects through Craigslist, through different websites, taking a freelance positions, right? Working with a recruiter in a freelance capacity where they give you single one-off projects. That's how I got started. My career was freelancing. My friends sometimes tell me, would a white man apply? Why shouldn't you? Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way to think about things. Yeah. We also have these lenses of lived experiences and truths that have been handed down to us that we inherently bring with us into different spaces. And the way we see opportunity is actually the culmination of our lived experiences and experiences that were handed down to us. So how we see an opportunity isn't necessarily entirely just us as well. How do you recommend redesigns of original ideas? Never thought of what you said. Idea of updating a familiar website, news. Yeah. Right? It's so much easier updating a familiar website, right? And people get it, you get it. Much easier. Yeah. Sometimes our ego takes the better of us. And it's like, we have to do this gargantuan thing. But it's like, if you want to do it, more power to you, go for it. But I see like 99% of the students they don't have the effort or time to be able to dedicate to it. And it's okay if you don't, and it's more of a coming to terms with your capacity as well. redesigns over original ideas. I would say just pick a feature, right? Make it like, bring it back down to like the smallest piece and pick a feature and just really, really focus on that. Yeah. Same thing with like redesigning other people's projects, is pick a feature and just focus on that, right? Don't do like the whole TikTok experience, right? Like you're gonna like lose your like mind. Like maybe it's like the recommendation engine, right? Or maybe it's just making the commenting feature more fun, inclusive, right? Like start from there and see what comes out of it. And the focus is, right, less about how much you can touch, but what is the quality of work you're delivering on these smaller things that's going to make it seem so that you're really mindful of these things, right? The last thing somebody wants, especially hiring a new designer, is really like spreading themselves thin across like a big project, and right, like not really thinking things through. And as we think about how our products will touch so many lives, right, at the very micro level, we have to be considerate and conscientious of all these little features. Yeah. How do you find projects on Craigslist? Never seen anything on here. Are there certain words to look for on the site? I just searched UX designers, all those different terms that we had talked about. Yeah. Where is it? Yeah, where did it go? Oh, here it is. Here you go. All these different terms. Yeah. Sound good? Awesome. So we have a little bit of time and we have a little group activity that we'd like to do. Kenny, we can stop sharing too. Thank you for coming. Enjoy our recording. See you later. Bye.